Well, as we mentioned, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is traveling. He's in Italy today, where he will be meeting with other G7 foreign ministers to discuss that deadly chemical attack in Syria and how best to respond. One option being considered is further sanctions against backers of the Assad regime, and that would include Russia. And this comes as we learn, while a majority of Americans support the airstrikes, 69% of Americans believe President Trump needs congressional approval for further military action in the country. Joining me now from Washington is Ibrahim Al-Assil. He's a fellow at the Middle East Institute. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Vlad.
So the National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, said that the strike sent a very clear signal. Do you think that this message will prevent Assad from taking further action, or will these atrocities continue?
Well, I think that's the most important message to be sent to the Assad regime and his allies. But based on their previous behavior, most likely the Assad and his allies will try to test that again to see how serious the United States was with that message. So they might increase actually their attacks against civilians to see if the U.S. will be serious to enforce that new red line, or it's going to be only one event and it won't happen again. However, I think it's very important because killing civilians in Syria indiscriminately was the root cause behind escalating the conflict and ISIS and making everything more complicated. So putting that red line is very important to de-escalate the crisis inside Syria.
Yeah, Ibrahim, I guess there probably will be two ways that Assad will take this. Either he will see it as a new administration, a new president who will not tolerate the use of chemical weapons on his own people, or as we saw on Saturday, where he resumed bombing, not with chemical weapons, but with conventional weapons from that very same airbase that we struck with our Tomahawk missiles. He may see it as a way to bolster those who support him in the region, specifically Russia and Iran, and even members of his own family and party, that, look, he's standing up to the United States. What do you think is going through his mind?
Yeah, that's certainly, I think, what's going on in Assad's mind and in his regime. They want to get more support from Iran and Russia. They want to continue their behavior. But I don't think they will go far because they don't have the capability to continue doing that. They did that in the last 6 years because the international community and the U.S. did nothing to stop them or to put a limit to killing civilians and bombing and using different weapons. And also it's important to mention that chemical weapons wasn't the reason behind the majority of the casualties inside Syria. So I think it's also important to send messages to Assad that it's not okay, for example, to use other weapons to kill civilians. And it won't be okay if only it's not chemical weapon. All weapons should be prohibited, and there should be limits to confront Assad and reduce the air bombs against civilians in Syria if we want to take serious steps towards a political solution in the future.
Yeah, I wonder how the Syrian people feel and what they want, because the numbers are so depressing, so stark. Over 500,000 people over the last 6 years, countless attacks, bombings with conventional weapons and other. Do they see what happened last week, the attack on the airbase, as perhaps a glimmer of hope, or is it for them, not that big of a deal because it didn't change their situation, at least in the short term? They are still under attack by Assad's forces. At any moment, a plane could fly over them and bomb them out of their homes.
It definitely gave them hope, and they've been wanting to. They've been waiting to see that for years. They wanted to see that the international community is willing to do something to protect them and to reduce the violence by Assad regime. But also they are a bit concerned that what's going to happen next? Is it going to be only one strike and then Assad will have a green light to continue killing them using different weapons like barrel bombs and other missiles, or is it going to be a serious change to protect them? The Syrian people, they want stability. They definitely also don't want to see a regime change imposed on them by external factors. But what they want to see, the international community and the U.S. putting pressure on the Assad regime to go towards the negotiations and to create a credible environment for the negotiations, to create consequences for those who's gonna violate any ceasefire. In the previous times, we saw different ceasefires taking place inside Syria, but the fighting parts, they didn't see that there will be consequences if they violate it. And that's why the regime kept violating those agreements. So the Syrians on the ground, they want to see that those who will violate the ceasefire will be punished, and that punishment will make or will create credible environment for the negotiation and for the political process.
I think that's an interesting point that you raise, and something that doesn't get talked a lot about, which is how the Syrian people feel about, specifically with regards to regime change. It is a sovereign country. All too often the political discussion in the United States is about doing something like that without taking into consideration how the people actually living in that country feel. Any kind of change is going to have to take place with Russia at the table. You know that Secretary Tillerson is headed to Moscow tomorrow. Do you see, I mean, you know that Russia has to take place, has to be a part of resolving this conflict in Syria. Do you think that they'll go along with what the United States is suggesting?
I hope the Russians will change their position to be more constructive and try to go forward with a political solution. Syrians on the ground, they've been sending, I think, very clear signals what they want. For 6 years, they've been bombed and slaughtered and killed by the regime, and they didn't stop rising against that regime. I know the Secretary of State, Tillerson, said that the future of Assad will be determined by the Syrian people. They want to do that, but they've been killed and slaughtered. And what's actually happening is that their future is being determined by Assad, not the other way around. So I hope that message will be clear, and Secretary of State Tillerson will carry that message to the Russians, that there is no future for Assad on the long term in Syria, and especially that it's in the vital U.S. interest and the global interest to fight ISIS, and it's not possible to fight ISIS if Assad continues killing civilians indiscriminately, because ISIS is a symptom of the Syrian crisis. ISIS emerged in Syria because of the violence, and they promoted themselves as, we are here to protect you from the killing by the regime. So I will second what the National Security Advisor said, McMaster, that it should be a simultaneous goal to fight ISIS and Assad at the same time. So to defeat ISIS militarily on the short term, Assad should be limited and pressured to stop killing people, and to defeat ISIS on the long term and strategically, Assad should be eliminated from power in Syria.
And we haven't even talked about Iran, which is a discussion for another day. Ibrahim, Al-Assil, thank you so much for your analysis. We appreciate it.